Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, I hope everyone's having a fantastic day and an even better week. It's a bit of a scorcher out there today. Today, folks, we want to talk about recognizing the patterns, right? We've alluded to in other videos talking about patterns, and of course, breaking cycles and so forth, and they're very interrelated. Oftentimes, we use key performance indicators in organizations and other metrics throughout all of culture to see what our score is, right? To see how we're performing. Uh, our test scores, right? A good example, right? How'd you do on the test? What percentage did you get? Same idea, right? Key performance indicators. What's my on time delivery? 90%, 95, 85, 80? What's my turnover rate? All these things, right? These are the result of our performance overall, right? And these are things that help us to recognize if we're hitting our mark or if we're not hitting our mark. But what's different about pattern recognition isn't a matter of saying, hey, we didn't hit our mark and just simply going, we need to try to hit our mark. Yes, you do. But you also have to be willing to go in, do the observations to recognize the patterns. And hopefully, if you're doing good management walks, Gemba walks, along with your team and your support staff, doing your walks and staying engaged with your team, it should be a little bit easier to recognize patterns early and be able to make some corrections to navigate so that you can maintain very excellent performance indicators, right? So recognizing the patterns. But we have to go deeper than just recognizing patterns because even management walks is not enough to be able to recognize everything you need to recognize. You have to spend time and you have to go deeper. And not only do you have to go deeper, it can't necessarily be obfuscated to one improvement professional or a person here or there. This really has to be a team-wide effort, right? And the best way to recognize patterns is to talk about them, right? This is these are things that the uncomfortable conversations sometimes, but talking about pattern recognition, uh, trainings like such that I've put together that actually talk about some of the interactive things that go on with individuals and teams that lead their behavior into particular kind of pigeonholes them into ruts and so forth. But we have to be willing to do the observations to recognize the pattern. I have had quite a lengthy professional life of observing and recognizing patterns and then making adjustments, changes, and breakthroughs and so on, and helping teams and developing them so that they could go on and do some of these things as well in a more effective way. And since then, I've developed and honed an even better system. But the main thing is that we aren't blind to the pattern, and it could be our own pattern. Remember, we've talked in the past too about codependence, right? And that whole thing. We've talked about addiction and codependence and all these things. And it's really easy to couch this when we're talking about individual behavior where it's alcohol or drugs or any kind of addictive thing. Really, anything, really, right? But when you get into organizations or a team level situation, you're also dealing with emotions, right? You're dealing with emotions. You're dealing with all the emotional IQ, right? The IQ, emotional IQ, physical, moral. You're dealing with a lot. And if your team is a little more aware of some of these things, it can make it easier for them to identify it in themselves and outwardly to others on the team instead of becoming too precharged, preloaded to react and then worsening the situation, right? Which in itself can be a pattern. So we have to kind of guard ourselves on these on allowing patterns to get away because patterns become habits and habits are so difficult to break. They're difficult to break when people get in bad habits at work, if they're cutting corners. And what typically drives a normalcy of somebody who cuts corners is if you don't have a good quality, uh, verifying and validating your processes and how things get created within your organization. Doesn't matter if it's an actual thing or a service, right? You need to go with that sales person out to out with them to visit customers so that you can see and so that they have an opportunity to explain what they do and so that you can see what they do as well and that you can appreciate, but you can also be, you're outside the box. Even if you're their boss, you still can see what they're doing and you can mentor that a little bit or ask questions anyway and just say, yeah, I noticed you do it this way. Why don't you, do you ever apply this technique or blah, blah? And it opens up discussion, right? And then you get to understand what they think and how they perceive and what they've experienced too, because they may have arrived at their particular process over time. Now, here's a challenge. The challenge, though, is whether you're the individual explaining, or whether you're the supervisor, leader who's asking the questions and just taking interest and so forth. We have to realize is that we don't have all the answers. My way is the best way that I have found. It isn't necessarily the best way, right? And that's one interesting thing about the best way. The best way is always going to be something that evolves. The best way is this way today, and then tomorrow it's this, and then a month from now it's that. And it takes, right? It takes form, it takes shape. It's a sculpting, right? You're sculpting the best way as you go. Sure, you have essentially a system, but then you have techniques within that system as well. Thing you have to be careful about it, people don't take the techniques too far to where we end up cutting corners, not following the intended processes and procedures and all the things. Now, some people are scared about policy, process, and procedure as, oh, it's so overly systematized and all that. Look, folks, Dorothy didn't get to Oz, by walking through the poppy fields and getting lost along the way. She only got there by staying on the yellow brick road, right? So, nod to Dorothy. And keeping her band of merry nitwits on the yellow brick road with her, right? So we can learn a lot from Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Okay, if you take your eye off the ball, the flying monkeys are going to carry you off, or you're going to fall asleep in the poppy fields, and so on and so forth. You're going to find that you get distracted, you cut corners, or you think you're finding a shortcut, but you're not. The way to do that is to look at the yellow brick road and say, why didn't they make this road straighter to begin with? And some things you can, and sometimes you can't, right? So, and take the kinks out of the road, but you do that together as a team, and you fix the road. You don't just veer off, wildly into the forest to get lost, right? Other great tales kind of encapsulate this a little bit, right? So the thing is to recognize our patterns. It might be a pattern of, maybe it's not deliberate, nefarious corner cutting. Maybe it's people are wanting to, thinking that they are finding a better way. And we don't have to get crazy and all kinds of, reactive and go bananas. We just need to gently get the team to understand, hey, if we're going to create a new path, let's do an assessment, analyze it, create the new path, standardize it. Now it's part of our new path, and everybody takes that path on that particular stretch of the road, right? So don't get too caught up and too worried about it. Don't get in this gotcha mindset, right? Even as going in to do, whether it was audits or improvement projects or leading sites myself, you always want to go in asking questions because you're going to learn a lot more. 80% of the things you might have thought were gotchas were things that when you listen for more than a minute, right, to the folks, what you find out is, oh, there's a reason why that they're doing it this way, and this is a legitimate reason. We do need to standardize this. Hey, folks, we can't, stick to the path, but let's get together and put our heads together and formalize this and evaluate it, make sure we're good, and then formalize it. To make this process easy for your team, right? Because if you can make the process of improving your process more efficient and more a process of ease than it is to cut the corner to begin with, or cut any corners to begin with, then you're winning. That's a good thing. But that means that you're opening up communication. You're inviting communication, critique, feedback. You have to break your own patterns here, right? Now let's get back from the team to the individual. If you're a leader, support staff, it could be any team member really, but if you're a leader or support staff and you have a leadership function, right, you need to recognize your own patterns. Your personal patterns, your professional patterns, all your patterns. Assess your patterns. Do I have bad habits that my team are picking up on? If you're cutting corners, I guarantee you your team will think it's okay to cut corners also. Or if they perceive that you're cutting corners, right? If you're going home 3 hours early for 2 weeks straight, your team is going to think you're not committed, right? But in reality, maybe you had medical things that required your attention. Okay. I'm using this as a hypothetical, but a realistic one, right? What do? You communicate, hey, I'm going to be out. I got some personal things to take care of, yada, yada. And you don't have to give away all your personal, story, but you do need to communicate with your team so that you don't let perceptions. Part of breaking your own pattern is to ignore that people will have a perception. It doesn't mean you have to conform your personality and lose all your, who you are. It doesn't. But it does mean you have to communicate, right? You have to communicate, and just like in sports, you anticipate movement, right? The quarterback's anticipating the receiver cutting across the field to throw the pass. Anticipate that they're going to be where they're going to be when they're going to be there, and throw the pass to intercept or to, into their field so that they can catch it, right? So it doesn't get intercepted. That anticipation, right? Your team is also looking to you as well, right? And so they're anticipating certain behaviors from you. Now that is a pattern, right? There isn't it's having an expectation, uncommunicated expectation, either way, whether it's communicating expectation to others or others having a quiet expectation of you. If you're not communicating expectation, then that's a pattern you need to break. So breaking patterns, recognizing these patterns across all facets of your interactions, your communications, how you do work, how you conduct work, how you handle materials, how you deal with scrap, how you deal with customer issues. Hey, if these things occur, you sit down with your sales force and say, hey, how do we deal with situations as they arise? And then start plotting out what if scenarios for avenues so that you can make sure that the customer is handled irrespective. Well, if this component fails, we have to go do this, this, and that, and if this one, and so forth. Educate yourself on your processes that your team has, because part of breaking your pattern might be that you're pigeonholing yourself, that you're in a bit of a silo in your office, or you're just not engaging enough, right? Spending too much time comfortable in meetings than you are engaging where the work is actually being done, right? And that's difficult for some. Some were raised in this, I get a cup of coffee, I walk around the office for 5 minutes saying hey to everybody, just making sure, generally everything's okay. And then I'm in the office the rest of the day. Now, there are times that a leader has to do that because you might have to be putting presentation together, reports, or you're talking to your boss, or you're talking to vendors, whatever you're doing, right? You're doing the things. But you can't allow yourself to get pigeonholed, or I won't say pigeonholed, but siloed into your office too long. You have to break your pattern. My thing is when I would get busy doing, I might have been putting a presentation, or I was doing a little research into something we were doing, problem solving as well. But if I didn't at least try to break myself out every couple hours, first of all, you start to, your performance in your office is going to drop if you're not taking a bit of a break. Okay. But don't just take a break, make it a productive break, right? How is that productive? Well, if I go engage with my team, I'm still finding out how things are going, issues they have, but I've kind of interrupted my process for a minute. And that allowed me to like let that half of my brain cool off a bit, right? So so find a sweet spot that works because your industries are going to be different, so your methodologies are going to be different. But in general, don't be afraid to look at your own patterns, right? You can be just as codependent on your team, expecting that they have it all figured out. And sometimes they don't have it all figured out, and they may be afraid to tell you. That's a pattern they need to break. And you need to have that talk. You need to have that communication so that they're comfortable breaking a pattern. Hey, I don't want to, get stuck in a rut here and in, a bad habit, right? A bad habit is just essentially a process that's convenient or a default. And it's default if you're not out there making sure it's not a default behavior, right? It'll be a default behavior. Oh, we just throw that stuff over there until we're done. And then you recognize, well, we can't, and here's why. And then they say, oh, well, then what do I do with it? Right now you're having to fix the problem after fix it after the problem has arisen. Now this happens, right? We're human. Sometimes this happens in the moment. People have to figure it out. But if communication's open and you have a little radio or your phone and they go, hey, we're doing this, that, and the other, where should we stack these boxes, or where should we put these pallets, or whatever, where should we store this stuff, whatever it is, how should we, organize, blah, 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 blah. Your team needs to be proactive enough to ask the question, but your leadership team also needs to be also engaged enough to have a little more forward thinking element in a way about them. This is a conversation you can also have to break patterns, is they need to be seeing more than a half step in front of their team's efforts. They need to be saying what is to come. Well, we're taking shipments of X, Y, and Z. I know I'm going to have an excess amount of boxes, pallets, storage containers, whatever it is, accumulating. I need to tell them up front when we're done with those, these need to go X, Y, Z. Now this sounds pretty obvious, right? But people get busy and speed past these sorts of things all the time. And a good leader is going to have enough vision to look ahead a little bit in the process to pick up on some of this stuff. Now, I'm not saying you're not a good leader if something sneaks past you. We've all had that happen, okay? But you need to learn from that, right? You need to question the pattern, right? Hey, I see a pattern. Is this pattern a good pattern or not a so good a pattern? It's not the so good a pattern, like a little spaghetti sauce there. Is it a good pattern, or is it, a pattern that doesn't benefit your team or you? Okay. Is this a good pattern? If it is, stick with it. Normalize it, formalize it. Hey, this is what we do from now on. So and so came up with a great way they handled this. Let's do that every time, right? And give acknowledgement to those people with great ideas and so on and so forth. Do those things. Okay, so break your pattern. It's recognize your pattern, break your pattern, which is breaking a cycle, right? Which could be anything. But if you don't recognize the patterns, then you won't even question. And sometimes it's just convenient to just keep doing business as usual. Well, the only way we get better and change and transform is questioning business as usual and come at it from a different, perspective, different angle, sometimes getting together to problem solve as a team and figure it out, right? All right, folks, enough on that one today. Recognize your patterns. Don't be afraid to, question those patterns, break those cycles, and then reestablish and, build processes and structures and systematize in a way that works for your team, that gives them the latitude and freedom to benefit the customer, your team, and then the organization as a whole. If you do it in that order, in that sequence, you're always going to come out on top. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage folks. And when we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture, right, but we're transforming ourselves. And there's nothing that is more important than transformation. Because if we're transforming, our customers are winning. And who are not customers in our lives? They're everywhere. We are even our own customer. All right, folks, that's enough for today. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.